my favorite players in the modern age to study, based on the style I attempt to play in a lot of the time, is Grandmaster Georg Meier. And he has a line in the Catalan that, when I studied the games of Ulf Andersson, I saw it there as well. And though it's a line that has a drawish reputation, Meier seems to win quite a good number of games with it, especially in Title Tuesday. So as we'll see in this game, I'll kind of borrow some ideas that he's used and even use some of his example games to show overall how to play it. Because at the end of the day, as I've analyzed the Catalan for Black's perspective, it's hard to find concrete advantages. Like the modern lines that you're getting, and we'll get to the Catalan via transposition here. D4 is probably the most direct route. So here we've reached the typical Catalan position, and after D takes C4, this is where we see the big branch. Now, Queen C2 has become the most popular move at the top level, and after A6, you get A4, and there's multiple different options, and I can't personally find any big advantage for white anywhere. And there's a lot of theory. It seems to be the battleground that the top guys are in all the time. So if it's a lot of theory, none of it's very intuitive, I leave that to the real professionals, we'll say. So I want something that's practical, that I can understand, that I can remember, and I can fight for a win from. So, yeah. After Queen C2, a line that has been really popular, and that comes out of the Carlsen Nepo World Championship match, is this line with B5. So Nepo was getting some good positions in the match from B5. I like the more old school approach, the way Grandmaster Andersson and Meier both do, with Queen A4, just simply hitting the C-pawn. Okay, after A6, we're going to grab. After B5, where's the best square for the queen, that's most flexible? Okay, Bishop B7, and now, I remember the first time I studied this position was in Grandmaster of Rook's text for the Grandmaster Repertoire series. And they had these ideas of, okay, we need to stop C5. So we're going to go Bishop D2, and a lot of lines we're going to go Bishop A5 to pin the pawn. Almost all lines deal with either reacting to or preparing against Black making the freeing break in the position. Typically, when Black gets that break in, they've got full equality. So the GM Meier special, if you will, is Bishop G5. And after knight BD7, there's wonderful coordination to play the C5 break. So we give up the bishop, and there are a couple of minor sidelines here. So if they don't take with a knight, which is the main line, you have a tactic available. If they take with a pawn or bishop, we have knight G5, which threatens mate as well as winning this bishop. So as they defend against the mate, we have this nice grip, and GM Meier has a number of wins, if you look at his chess.com account, from this type of position. With the break stopped, white has a slow and steady plus. You can do things like E3, knight D2, knight B3, and really just start gripping squares and pile up on the backwards pawn. So knight F6 was played in the main game. So what were we playing for? We gave up the bishop in the open position. We've gotten a move to uncoordinate, gotten this knight, if I could arrows, to get him away from C5. So we need to have more control over C5. So knight BD2, followed by knight B3. So next steps. What are really goals in this position? Okay, you cannot permanently stop the C5 break, but very often I'll find that the players playing black get confused here, and you're able to set up a bind, which we're going to see in the game. And this is a quite competent player at almost 2,500 in blitz on lichess. And if I could trade my light square bishop for its counterpart, keep the position closed, the knights are going to be better than the mismatch. That's what you're playing for organically. So as a sideline, if c5 is played immediately, we've got take, rook fd1, get out of the way, and with this type of position, knight e5, knight d3, and rook ac1. White just has just a little bit of something to work with. Very often, this turns out to be a draw, but if you don't mind playing these dry positions, or you're in a situation where a draw wouldn't kill you, definitely consider this line. But if you're like me, I don't really mind anymore. I just want to understand where I'm at, and there's not much to remember with this Catalan line. My opponent decided to go for bishop e4. So, okay, queen c3. And let's take a look at a game that GM Meier won against another grandmaster. That GM decided to go for knight d5. And we get the trade down. But in the meantime, we've gotten back the bishop pair, challenged the open file. Now queen d4, bothering the bishop. Knight e5. White's got just that much. It's just a little bit from better piece placement. Check. And after knight d5, e4, a3, and this imbalance, though it is still equal, GM Meier was able to squeeze out a full point in a rapid tournament from 2024. In the main game, my opponent played c6, and this isn't going to help with the c5 break. It in fact insists that you don't even plan on playing c5, you just want to chill. I'm all about that. So, okay, let's get the absolute most out of our position. So I'm going to start off with rook fd1. This assures that you're not going to change your mind because I'm lining up discoveries on your queen. Knight d5. Now queen e1 is definitely an option, but I want to keep an eye on c5 still, so I'm going to go queen c1. No c5 break. So they go a5. Okay, you want to kick my knight to a square where he already wants to go. Sounds good to me. Knight c5. And I'm bothering your bishop on e4. Once you capture, you no longer have the bishop pair and you have a backwards pawn, which is going to gradually become more of a target. Whether if you try to create an imbalance by taking here, I'm going to find the right moment to play e4 and eventually d5, and your entire position is going to fall apart. Or you find another path, like queen b6. If I allow you to take, it closes my access on the c-file. Don't want to allow that. So I invite the last person to the party and keep the pressure. fd8, knight e5, more pressure here, and since my bishop wasn't doing too much, let's get rid of those. And we can see the gradual improvements in coordination that I have here. I want to get my rooks to the c-file, but first I've got this problem with the d-pawn, so let's shore up the structure. Okay, it's very natural to just go, knight f3. We want the most options for our pieces. Let's go knight d3, and it keeps an eye on e5. King f7. Now rook d5. Should we trade? Well, ideally, when attacking, you'd like to keep pieces. I mean, I was even looking at this idea, rook takes b5, if this rook, say, went to d7. But with the rook on d5, can't really have everything we want there. So I keep the tension to wait to see if we can't induce a mistake, because it's the principle of 2 weaknesses, not 1. Right now we've only got the backward c-pawn to work with. So now we begin the phase of the game that says, my opponent's trying to do something, not sure what. Don't rush it. Silman in the complete endgame course in the master chapter talks about cat and mouse, slow playing, not trying to make too many changes, let your opponent get lulled into a sense of complacency so they'll beat themselves for you. So I'm like, okay, he wants to play g4 and could potentially use key squares in the future. So I'm going to say no. And once you go h5, I'm like, okay, you could play g4, so I'm going to go king f3 to stop that. All right, you went rook g8. Well, I'm not going back to g2. Let's get the king closer to the action. I'm going to cover the knight. So if you want to go the g4 stuff, that's completely your call. Okay, rook h8. Now, black is starting to get very, very comfortable in this position. Like, I can't attack. He's gained some space, and with it, he's gained some confidence. But I haven't really given up anything. I moved a pawn and then shuffled my king to a better square. b4. Now that the rook is on h8, can't really do anything about the b pawn. You can't take because I'm going to win the c pawn by force. a4. Now you will never be able to play c5. I'm going to shore up the structure. No risk there. Now rook d6. Okay. What's the next step in probing a little bit in the position? Well, what's covering the c pawn? The rook and the knight. Can we get rid of one and or both of them? Maybe. Let's start with knight c5. Looks like a good square for the knight. Now, knight e4. This is a little bit of an improvement over where the knight was before. Keeps an eye on some key squares, and I'm not too worried about the f-pawn getting moved because we'll be able to snack on the g5 pawn. So rook d5. And what do you think? Come up with 3 candidate moves. Start with the most aggressive one. See if you could find the best continuation here. Hopefully you were eyeing what I did in the game. Knight c3, hitting the rook. Because after rook d6, and it should be noted that rook f5 is even worse due to what looks like g4 where the rook's going nowhere. Knight takes b5, exploiting the pin. And now the rest is going to be trivial. Protected pass pawn. Keep our rook aggressively placed and their rook passively placed. Opposition, getting ready to push. Check. And plenty of time to let you in because I can snack on pretty much all the pawns and will still have leftovers to win with. So my opponent had enough here and resigned. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. A brief overview of Catalan ideas in a line that I very much like. In the modern age, it's all this theory intensity, and I have trouble remembering it, to be completely honest. And if you can get playable games that you understand and can still play it at a high level, you don't have to study it, I'm in. So maybe you feel the same way too. If you do, throw me a like, I'd appreciate it, and subscribe.